At Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, a decorated fighter pilot was about to discover that her routine grounding was anything but routine. What started as a minor hydraulic discrepancy took a shocking turn when Squadron Commander Colonel Ian Mercer's eyes locked onto the coordinates engraved inside her wedding ring. First Lieutenant Ava Torres wasn't your typical pilot fighting for respect in a male-dominated cockpit. For 3 years, she had proven herself as one of only 3 female F-35 pilots in the 18th Wing, known for her precision, punctuality, and unwavering dedication to duty. When she was abruptly grounded for what appeared to be a fabricated maintenance issue, she had no idea she was walking into a deadly conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. Torres began questioning discrepancies in maintenance logs and timestamps that would lead to the explosive truth about her husband's death 2 years earlier. What began as a suspicious aircraft grounding would become a relentless pursuit of justice that would expose treason, murder, and systematic cover-ups. The Pacific Command would never be the same after Torres discovered that the coordinates on her ring, her husband's final gift, were actually his last desperate clue, pointing to where his killers had planned for him to die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. First Lieutenant Ava Torres had always prided herself on being ready 15 minutes early for everything. At 28, she was one of only 3 female fighter pilots in the 18th Wing at Kadena Air Base, and she'd learned that being punctual was just one of the many ways she could avoid giving anyone a reason to question her place in the cockpit. This morning was no different. She arrived at the Squadron building at 0530 hours, coffee in hand, flight suit pressed to regulation perfection. The humid Okinawan air clung to her skin as she walked across the tarmac toward her F-35 Lightning II. The pre-dawn darkness was just beginning to give way to the first hints of sunrise, painting the eastern horizon in shades of deep purple and gold. Ava loved this time of day, when the base was quiet except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional roar of an early morning departure. It was peaceful in a way that reminded her why she'd chosen to fly fighters instead of following her father into the Navy like he'd wanted. Lieutenant Torres? The voice belonged to Technical Sergeant Mason Price, one of the crew chiefs assigned to her aircraft. He was young, maybe 23, with the kind of eager-to-please demeanor that marked him as someone still trying to prove himself in the maintenance world. But this morning, something was different about his usual confident swagger. His shoulders were tight, and he kept glancing over at the Squadron building as if expecting someone to appear. "Morning, Price. How's she looking today?" Ava asked, nodding toward her jet. The F-35 sat in its hardened aircraft shelter like a sleeping predator, its angular stealth design still impressive even after 3 years of flying them. Price shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his clipboard clutched against his chest. "Well, ma'am, that's actually what I need to talk to you about. We found a discrepancy in the hydraulic system during the pre-flight inspection. Nothing major, just some pressure readings that were slightly off spec, but..." He trailed off, his eyes darting away from hers. "But what, Sergeant?" "Master Sergeant Holt wants to see you in the maintenance office before you sign off on anything." Ava felt the first stirring of unease in her stomach. Master Sergeant Kendra Holt had been working on fighters since before Ava was old enough to drive. If Holt flagged something, it was usually legitimate, but the way Price was acting, nervous, evasive, almost guilty, made her wonder if there was more to this than a simple maintenance issue. The maintenance office was a cramped space filled with computer terminals, technical manuals, and the perpetual smell of coffee that had been brewing too long. Holt looked up from a stack of paperwork when Ava entered, her weathered face showing none of the warmth that usually characterized their interactions. "Lieutenant, we need to ground your bird for today, maybe longer." Holt's voice was matter-of-fact, but Ava caught something in her tone, a careful neutrality that felt forced. "What exactly did you find?" Holt handed her a maintenance form, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow. "Hydraulic pressure variance in the primary flight control system. It's within acceptable parameters, but barely. I'm not comfortable signing off on it for flight operations." Quote. Ava studied the numbers, her engineering degree from the Air Force Academy kicking in as she processed the data. The readings were indeed slightly off, but well within the tolerance ranges specified in the technical manual. In fact, they were better than half the readings she'd seen approved for flight in the past month. "Sergeant Holt, these numbers look fine to me." "Actually, they look better than fine." "I know what they look like, Lieutenant." Holt's response was clipped, almost offensive. "But I've got 22 years in this business, and sometimes you have to trust your gut over the manual." Before Ava could respond, the office door opened and Colonel Ian Mercer stepped inside. The squadron commander was a tall, lean man with graying temples and the kind of quiet presence that could fill a room without him saying a word. Ava had always respected him. He was fair, competent, and had a reputation for protecting his people. But right now, his expression was unreadable. "Problem, Master Sergeant." "Sir, we're grounding Lieutenant Torres' aircraft for a hydraulic issue. Should have it sorted in a day or two." Mercer nodded slowly, his steel-gray eyes moving from Holt to Ava. "Safety first, always." Then his gaze dropped to Ava's hands, where she was unconsciously twisting her wedding ring, a simple silver band that had belonged to her husband, Captain Lucas Torres, before his death 2 years earlier. The colonel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or concern. "Lieutenant, report to the operations desk for alternate duties. We'll get you back in the air as soon as maintenance clears your bird." "Yes, sir." Ava's voice was steady, professional, but inside she was reeling. Something was wrong here. The maintenance issue felt manufactured, the responses too rehearsed, and the way Mercer had looked at her ring, as if he'd seen it before. As she left the maintenance office, Ava could hear the murmur of conversation resuming behind her. She walked slowly back toward the squadron building, her mind racing. Lucas had given her this ring the night before his last mission, a covert operation that had ended with his aircraft going down in the Pacific. The official report had been maddeningly vague. Equipment failure during a routine training exercise. But Lucas had been flying special operations missions, not training flights, and the discrepancies in the official story had haunted her ever since. The coordinates engraved on the inside of the band caught the early morning light as she held her hand up. Lucas had told her they were the location where they'd first met, but she'd never bothered to verify that. Now, for the first time, she found herself wondering if there might be more to those numbers than a romantic gesture. The operations desk was supposed to be temporary duty, but by the end of the first week, Ava began to suspect that temporary was a relative term in the Air Force. She'd been assigned to update training records, review flight schedules, and perform other administrative tasks that kept her firmly planted behind a desk while her squadron mates flew their missions. From her position near the windows overlooking the flight line, she had a clear view of her F-35 sitting idle in its shelter. Every morning she watched Price and the other maintainers perform their inspections, and every evening she watched them secure the aircraft for the night. What struck her as odd was how much attention her supposedly broken jet was receiving compared to the others. Price seemed to spend an unusual amount of time around it, often with a clipboard and what appeared to be nervous energy. "Still watching your bird, Torres?" The voice belonged to Captain Rachel Kim, one of the other female pilots in the squadron. Rachel dropped into the chair next to Ava's desk, a cup of coffee in hand, and concern written across her features. "Hard not to. It's been a week and a half. How long does it take to fix a hydraulic pressure variance?" Rachel shrugged. "Depends on what they're really fixing, I guess. Word around the squadron is that it might not be just a maintenance issue." Ava felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of word?" "Nothing specific, just rumors. You know how it is. Someone heard someone say that there might be an investigation of some kind. Flight safety, maybe, or standards and evaluation looking into something." The implications hit Ava like a physical blow. An investigation could mean anything from a review of her flying performance to questions about her security clearance. Either way, it could end her career as a fighter pilot. Did anyone say what kind of investigation? "No, and I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, but I thought you should know what people are saying." Rachel stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't buy it. You're one of the best pilots in the squadron, and everyone knows it." Quote, After Rachel left, Ava found it impossible to concentrate on her paperwork. Instead, she found herself studying the maintenance logs that crossed her desk as part of her administrative duties. It was supposed to be routine, checking that work orders were properly closed out, ensuring that parts requisitions matched actual installations, verifying that inspection schedules were being followed. But, as she worked through the stack of documents, patterns began to emerge that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Her aircraft's maintenance log showed multiple inspections over the past week, that she hadn't seen performed from her vantage point at the operations desk. More troubling, the timestamps on some of the inspection entries overlapped with times when she'd observed the aircraft sitting unattended. She was studying a particularly suspicious entry when Master Sergeant Holt appeared beside her desk. "Lieutenant, how are you settling in with the desk work?" Holt's tone was casual, but Ava detected an undercurrent of something else. Wariness, maybe, or concern. "Fine, Sergeant. Just making sure all the paperwork matches up." "That's good. Important to keep the records straight." Holt glanced around the operations center, then leaned closer to Ava's desk. "Word of advice, though. Sometimes, it's better not to look too hard at things that aren't directly your responsibility. Politics above our pay grade, if you know what I mean." The warning was delivered gently, but it was definitely a warning. Ava looked up at Holt, searching her face for some clue about what was really going on. "Is there something I should know about my aircraft, Sergeant?" "Your aircraft is getting the best care we can provide, Lieutenant, just like all of them." Holt's expression softened slightly. "But sometimes the best care means taking extra time to make sure everything is exactly right, especially when there are interested parties asking questions." "What kind of interested parties?" Holt straightened up, the moment of openness passing. "The kind that can make life complicated for everyone involved." "Just keep your head down for now, Torres. This will all get sorted out." As Holt walked away, Ava felt the pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see beginning to move in her mind. Interested parties asking questions. An aircraft that was supposedly broken but receiving more attention than it needed. Maintenance logs that didn't match her observations. And underlying it all, the memory of Colonel Mercer's reaction to her wedding ring. That evening, she sat in her small base housing unit and pulled out her laptop. For the first time since Lucas's death, she found herself really looking at the coordinates engraved inside her wedding band. 26.3351 degrees north, 142.2003 degrees east. The numbers led to a location in the Pacific Ocean, roughly 600 miles southeast of Okinawa. It wasn't the location where she and Lucas had first met, that had been at a bar in Pensacola, Florida. These coordinates pointed to open water, far from any established flight training routes or operational areas that she knew about. She stared at the screen, her heart beginning to race. Why would Lucas have engraved coordinates to an empty patch of ocean inside her wedding ring? And why had Colonel Mercer reacted so strongly when he'd seen it? The base library was nearly empty at 2,100 hours, which was exactly what Ava had been counting on. She'd signed out a computer using her common access card, hoping that her administrative access would be sufficient for what she needed to research. The coordinates from her ring had been haunting her for 3 days, and she'd finally decided that she needed to know what they really meant. She started with basic geographic databases, confirming what she'd already discovered. The coordinates pointed to open ocean in the Philippine Sea. But as she dug deeper, using her military access to search operational databases, she began to find references that made her pulse quicken. The coordinates were approximately 50 nautical miles from a small, unnamed atoll that appeared in classified navigation charts but not in civilian ones. More interesting, the area around those coordinates showed up in restricted airspace notices dating back several years. It was designated as a temporary military operating area, with restrictions that had been extended multiple times. "Finding anything interesting, Lieutenant?" Ava spun around to find Major Evelyn Cho standing behind her, an amused expression on her sharp features. Cho was the base intelligence officer, a West Point graduate who had a reputation for knowing everything that happened on base before it actually happened. "Just doing some research, ma'am." "I can see that." Cho moved closer, glancing at the screen over Ava's shoulder. "Geographic coordinates in the Philippine Sea. Specific interest, or just general curiosity about our area of operations?" Ava's mind raced. She could lie, but Cho was intelligence. Lying to her was probably futile and definitely unwise. On the other hand, telling the truth might open doors she wasn't ready to walk through. "Personal research, ma'am. My husband was killed in an aircraft accident in this general area 2 years ago. I was trying to understand the geography better." Cho's expression softened slightly. "Captain Torres, I remember reading about that. I'm sorry for your loss." She paused, studying Ava's face. "But I should mention that some of the databases you're accessing contain classified information. Information that requires specific authorization to view." I'm using my assigned access level, ma'am. I'm not trying to access anything beyond my clearance. I know, but the area you're researching, let's just say it has some sensitivities associated with it. If you're serious about understanding what happened to your husband, you might want to be careful about how you pursue that understanding. The warning was delivered in the same tone that Holt had used, gentle but unmistakable. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Is there something specific I should know? There's a lot you should know, Lieutenant. The question is whether you're prepared for the answers. Cho glanced around the empty library, then leaned closer. Your husband's last mission wasn't a training flight. It was a covert operation, joint service, very compartmentalized. The accident report you received was sanitized for security purposes. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Sanitized how? Enough details removed to protect operational security and ongoing missions in the area, but not enough removed to hide the fact that someone wanted that mission to fail. The words hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. Ava stared at Cho, trying to process what she'd just heard. Someone wanted it to fail? I've said more than I should have already. Cho straightened up, her expression returning to its professional mask. But I will say this. If you're going to pursue this, you need to be very careful about who you trust. There are people on this base who know exactly what happened to your husband, and they've worked very hard to make sure that knowledge stays buried. As Cho walked away, Ava turned back to the computer screen, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the coordinates that had started this whole investigation. Lucas hadn't engraved their meeting place inside her ring. He'd engraved the location where he'd died. And if Cho was right, he'd died because someone had wanted him to. She thought about the maintenance issues with her F-35, the nervous behavior of the crew chiefs, Colonel Mercer's reaction to her ring, and now Cho's revelation about Lucas's mission. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a picture that terrified her. Someone had killed her husband and covered it up. And now, 2 years later, that same someone was trying to sideline her, possibly because they were afraid she was getting too close to the truth. Ava closed the browser and logged off the computer, her mind already moving to her next step. She needed more information, but she also needed allies. And most importantly, she needed to be very, very careful about who she trusted. Because if Cho was right, the people responsible for Lucas's death were still out there, still in positions of power, and still willing to do whatever it took to protect their secret. The summons came at 0630 hours, delivered by the squadron's administrative clerk with the kind of nervous efficiency that suggested he'd been told to treat it as urgent. Lieutenant Torres, Colonel Mercer wants to see you in his office immediately. Ava had been expecting this moment since her conversation with Major Cho 3 days earlier. She'd spent those days trying to act normal, performing her assigned administrative duties while her mind raced through possibilities and scenarios. Now, walking across the squadron building toward Mercer's office, she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The colonel's office was spartanly decorated, a few commendation plaques, a photograph of him with what appeared to be his flight school class, and a single personal item, a small model of an F-16 sitting on his desk. Mercer gestured for her to take a seat, then closed the door with a deliberate click that seemed to echo in the small space. Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're intelligent enough to appreciate directness. Mercer settled behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him. You've been asking questions. Questions about geographic coordinates, questions about classified operations, questions about your husband's death. Sir, I'm not finished. His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried an authority that cut through her attempted response. I understand the impulse. I understand the need to know, especially when someone you loved has been taken from you under circumstances that don't feel complete or satisfactory. Ava remained silent, sensing that Mercer was working towards something important. But I need you to understand that some questions, once asked, can't be unasked. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. And some truths, once discovered, change everything about how you see the world and your place in it. The colonel stood and moved to the window, looking out at the flight line where jets were preparing for the morning's operations. Your husband was a good pilot, Lieutenant. A good officer. He died serving his country, and that death had meaning, even if the full details of that meaning can't be shared. With respect, sir, Major Cho suggested that there was more to Lucas's death than equipment failure. Mercer turned back to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something crack in his professional composure. Major Cho shouldn't have said that. But she did, and now I need to know if my husband was murdered. The word hung in the air between them like a live grenade. Mercer closed his eyes briefly, then returned to his desk. Lieutenant Torres, you are a gifted pilot with a promising career ahead of you. You have security clearances that many officers would envy, and you have the respect of your peers and superiors. All of that could disappear very quickly if you continue down this path. Is that a threat, sir? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's a warning from someone who has seen what happens to people who poke into old wounds that powerful people want to keep closed. Mercer leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. There are forces at work here that go far above both of our pay grades. Forces that have resources and reach that you can't imagine. If you push this investigation, you will lose. And losing won't just mean the end of your career, it could mean the end of everything. Ava felt a chill run down her spine, but she also felt something else, a growing certainty that she was on the right track. Sir, are you telling me that my husband was killed to cover up something? Mercer was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope. I'm telling you to be very careful, Lieutenant. And I'm telling you that if you insist on pursuing this, you need to understand that there are people on this base who might be willing to help you, and people who will definitely try to stop you. The trick is figuring out which is which. He handed her the envelope. Don't open this here. Don't open it where anyone can see you. And if you decide this is more than you're prepared to handle, destroy it without reading it. As Ava left Mercer's office, the envelope felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. She made it through the morning's administrative work on autopilot, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities. At lunch, she drove off base to a small park overlooking the ocean and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a maintenance report for her F-35 dated the day she'd been grounded. But this report was different from the one she'd seen in Holt's office. This one showed that all systems, including the hydraulic system, were operating within normal parameters. At the bottom, in what appeared to be Holt's handwriting, was a note. Aircraft fully operational. No discrepancies found. K.H. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Her aircraft hadn't been broken. The grounding had been a fabrication, designed to sideline her for reasons she was only beginning to understand. And Master Sergeant Holt had documented the truth, then somehow gotten that documentation to Colonel Mercer. The hangars were nearly empty at 2,200 hours, with only a skeleton crew of maintainers working the night shift. Ava had waited until this late deliberately, knowing that Technical Sergeant Price often stayed behind to catch up on paperwork and avoid the scrutiny of the day shift supervisors. She found him in the tool room, updating inventory logs with the kind of methodical precision that characterized his work. Sergeant Price? He looked up, startled, nearly dropping his clipboard. Lieutenant Torres, what are you doing here so late? I wanted to talk to you about my aircraft, away from the usual crowds. Price's face went pale, and he glanced around the empty tool room as if looking for an escape route. Ma'am, I don't know what you think. I can tell you that Master Sergeant Holt hasn't already covered. Ava stepped closer, her voice gentle but insistent. Mason, can I call you Mason? I know you're a good maintainer. I know you take pride in your work and that you care about flight safety. That's why I'm having trouble understanding how you signed off on a hydraulic discrepancy that apparently didn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. I have a maintenance report that shows my aircraft was fully operational the day I was grounded. Your signature is on that report, certifying that all systems were within normal parameters. Price's hands were shaking now, and he set down his clipboard before he could drop it. Lieutenant, please, you don't understand the position I'm in. Then help me understand. Because right now, it looks like you falsified maintenance records to keep me out of the cockpit. That's a court-martial offense, Mason. That could end your career and put you in prison. You think I don't know that? Price's voice cracked slightly. You think I wanted to do any of this? But when a senior officer tells you to find a reason to ground a specific aircraft, you find a reason. That's how it works. Ava felt her pulse quicken. What senior officer? I can't tell you that. I won't tell you that. Price shook his head emphatically. I've already said too much. Mason, listen to me. We both took an oath when we joined the Air Force. An oath to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States. Part of that oath means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Price was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I was told you'd be grounded for a few days, maybe a week, just until some things got sorted out. But then you started asking questions, started looking into things, and what? And people got nervous. Important people. People who could make problems for everyone involved. Ava knelt down beside Price's chair, her voice urgent but compassionate. Mason, I think my husband was killed 2 years ago because he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to know about. And I think the same people who killed him are now trying to silence me. If that's true, then we're talking about murder and conspiracy at the highest levels. You have a chance to do the right thing here. Price looked up at her, tears beginning to form in his eyes. There's a Navy liaison officer who's been asking questions about you. Commander Rios. He wanted to know about your schedule, your flight patterns, your personal relationships. He specifically asked about your wedding ring. The revelation hit Ava like a lightning bolt. Commander Rios asked about my ring? He said he'd served with your husband, said he was just concerned about how you were handling your grief. But the questions he was asking, they didn't sound like concern. They sounded like intelligence gathering. When was this? 2 weeks ago. Right before you were grounded. Price wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Lieutenant, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I've got a wife and 2 kids, and they made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, my family could be at risk. Ava felt a surge of anger mixed with sympathy. These people, whoever they were, weren't just covering up a crime. They were systematically intimidating and manipulating good people to maintain their silence. Mason, I need you to write down everything you remember about your conversations with Commander Rios. Dates, times, specific questions he asked. Can you do that? Price nodded slowly. But Lieutenant, if I do this, if I help you, what's going to happen to my family? I don't know, Ava admitted. But I know what will happen if we don't do anything. The people responsible for my husband's death will continue to operate with impunity, and they'll destroy anyone who gets too close to the truth. That could be you next, or Master Sergeant Holt, or anyone else who knows too much. The officers' club at Kadena was busier than usual for a Thursday evening, with off-duty personnel unwinding after a long week of operations. Ava had chosen a table in the corner, positioned so she could see the entrance while maintaining some privacy for what she hoped would be a revealing conversation. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Rios entered at exactly 1,900 hours, scanning the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. He was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of confident bearing that marked him as a career officer on the rise. When he spotted her, his face broke into what appeared to be a genuine smile. Lieutenant Torres, I'm Dan Rios. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. They shook hands, and Ava noted that his grip was firm but not overpowering, the handshake of someone who understood the importance of making a good first impression. He ordered a beer and settled into the chair across from her, his manner relaxed and friendly. I have to say, I was surprised to get your call. It's been a while since anyone asked me about Lucas. I appreciate you taking the time, Commander. I know you're busy with your liaison duties. Please call me Dan. And it's no trouble at all. Lucas was a good friend and a hell of a pilot. I still think about him sometimes when I'm flying over the areas where we used to operate together. Ava studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or discomfort. I was hoping you could tell me more about his last mission. The official reports were sparse. Rios nodded sympathetically. That's unfortunately typical for the kind of work Lucas was doing. Training missions, especially the advanced ones, often involve classified procedures and locations. The reports have to be sanitized for security reasons. Training missions? Sure, Lucas was working on advanced navigation and communication protocols. Challenging stuff, pushing the envelope of what our aircraft and pilots could accomplish in difficult conditions. Ava felt her pulse quicken. Rios was lying. And not particularly well. Major Cho had already told her that Lucas's last mission wasn't a training flight, and the coordinates on her ring pointed to an area that didn't match any known training routes. I've been trying to understand the location where his aircraft went down. Do you remember the coordinates? For the first time since sitting down, Rios hesitated. It was barely perceptible. A slight pause, a momentary tightening around his eyes. But Ava caught it. I'm sorry, I don't remember the specific coordinates off the top of my head. It was 2 years ago, and we've flown a lot of missions since then. Ava reached into her pocket and pulled out her wedding ring, placing it on the table between them. Lucas had coordinates engraved inside this ring. I've been wondering if they might be related to his last mission. Rios picked up the ring, turning it over in his hands with what appeared to be casual interest. But when he read the coordinates engraved inside the band, his face went completely still. The friendly, relaxed expression vanished, replaced by something much more guarded. These coordinates... He set the ring down carefully, as if it had suddenly become dangerous to touch. Where did you say Lucas got this ring? I didn't say. But he gave it to me the night before his last mission. He told me the coordinates were where we first met, but I've checked, and they're not. Lieutenant Torres, I think there might be some confusion here. The coordinates in your ring, they don't point to any location where Lucas and I conducted training operations. Then what do they point to? Rios was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ring as if it might reveal secrets he wasn't prepared to share. I think you should talk to your chain of command about this. There are protocols for family members who have questions about classified operations. Commander, you just told me Lucas was on a training mission. Training missions aren't classified. The slip-up was obvious as soon as she said it, and they both knew it. Rios's carefully constructed story had just fallen apart, and the expression on his face showed that he realized it. Lieutenant, I think I misspoke. What I meant was... What you meant was that Lucas wasn't on a training mission at all. He was on an operational mission, wasn't he? A mission that you were part of. Rios stood up abruptly, leaving his beer untouched. I think this conversation has gone as far as it should. Lieutenant Torres, if you're smart, you'll let this go. Some things are better left buried. Like my husband? Rios paused at the door, looking back at her with something that might have been pity or regret. Lucas knew the risks when he volunteered for that mission. We all did. Sometimes the mission is more important than the individual. As he walked away, Ava sat staring at her wedding ring, her mind racing. Rios had just confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Lucas had died on an operational mission, not a training flight. And whatever that mission had been, it was important enough that people were still willing to lie and cover it up 2 years later. Major Cho's office was located in the intelligence section of the base, behind multiple security doors and within a secure, compartmented information facility that required special clearances to enter. Ava had requested the meeting through official channels, citing her need to discuss administrative matters related to ongoing operations. It wasn't entirely truthful, but it also wasn't entirely false. Lieutenant Torres, please have a seat. Cho gestured to a chair across from her desk, then moved to close the office door. I have to say, I was intrigued by your request for a meeting. Administrative matters related to ongoing operations is fairly vague, even by Air Force standards. Ma'am, I wanted to follow up on our conversation in the library. You mentioned that my husband's accident report had been sanitized for security purposes. Cho settled behind her desk, her expression carefully neutral. I remember our conversation. I also remember suggesting that you might want to be careful about pursuing certain lines of inquiry. I've been careful, ma'am, but I've also uncovered some information that I think you should know about. Ava pulled out the notebook where she'd been documenting her findings. My aircraft was grounded under false pretenses. The maintenance discrepancy that was used to justify the grounding never existed. Technical Sergeant Price was ordered by a senior officer to falsify the maintenance records. That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am, it is. And it gets more serious. I've learned that Lieutenant Commander Rios, who served with my husband on his last mission, has been asking questions about me, specifically about my wedding ring and the coordinates engraved inside it. Cho's eyebrows rose slightly. The coordinates you were researching in the library? Yes, ma'am. The same coordinates that Commander Rios claimed not to remember when I asked him about them directly, but his reaction when he saw the ring suggested that he knew exactly what those coordinates meant. And what do you think they mean? Ava took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either gain her a powerful ally or a dangerous enemy. I think they marked the location of a covert operation that went wrong, an operation that resulted in my husband's death, and possibly the deaths of others. And I think there are people on this base who know the truth about what happened but are actively working to cover it up. Cho was quiet for a long moment, studying Ava's face with a kind of intense focus that suggested she was weighing multiple factors and possibilities. Lieutenant, what I'm about to tell you could end both of our careers if it ever becomes public knowledge. Are you prepared for that? Ma'am, someone murdered my husband and then spent 2 years lying about it. They're now trying to silence me by destroying my career and intimidating good people like Sergeant Price. I'm prepared for whatever it takes to bring them to justice. Quote, Cho opened a locked filing cabinet behind her desk and withdrew a thin folder marked with classification stamps. What I'm about to show you is a heavily redacted mission summary from 2 years ago. Most of the details have been removed for security reasons, but there's one section that I've deliberately left unredacted. She handed Ava a single sheet of paper covered in black redaction marks, with only a few paragraphs visible. As Ava read, her hands began to shake. The unredacted section described a covert extraction operation near the coordinates engraved in her wedding ring. The mission had involved multiple aircraft and personnel from different services, tasked with recovering high-value assets from what was described as a, quote, compromised position. The operation had been designated as compartmentalized, with need-to-know restrictions at the highest levels. Ma'am, this describes an extraction mission, not a training flight. Yes, it does. And if you look at the date and location, you'll see that it corresponds exactly with your husband's last mission. Ava felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the full implications hit her. He wasn't killed in an accident, he was killed during an operation. An operation that someone decided needed to be covered up. The question is why? Cho took back the document and returned it to the filing cabinet. Lieutenant, I want you to understand something. By showing you this, I've committed a felony. I could spend the rest of my life in prison for violating classification protocols. Then why did you do it? Because I've spent 8 years in military intelligence, and I've learned to recognize when good people are being destroyed to protect bad secrets. Your husband died serving his country, and he deserved better than to have his death covered up and forgotten. Ava wiped her eyes, her grief now mixed with a burning sense of purpose. Ma'am, what do I do with this information? You be very, very careful, and you remember that there are people who will kill to keep this secret buried. Cho's voice was deadly serious. But you also remember that there are people, like Master Sergeant Holt, like Colonel Mercer, like me, who believe that the truth matters more than protecting institutional reputations. As Ava left Cho's office, she felt as though she was carrying a live bomb. The truth about Lucas's death was finally within reach, but she also understood that pursuing it could cost her everything, including her life. Master Sergeant Kendra Holt had spent 22 years in the Air Force learning to read between the lines of official requests and unofficial favors. So when she approached Ava at the operations desk on Friday morning with a clipboard and a matter-of-fact expression, her words carried the weight of careful planning. Lieutenant Torres, I need someone to accompany me on an inspection of the surplus equipment depot. Consider it part of your ongoing familiarization with base operations. The depot was located in a cluster of warehouses about 2 miles from the main base, surrounded by chain-link fencing, and accessible only through a security checkpoint that seemed more concerned with keeping people out than keeping track of who went in. Holt drove them there in a maintenance truck, loaded with inspection equipment and official-looking paperwork that would justify their presence to anyone who asked. Sergeant Holt, what exactly are we looking for here? Holt parked the truck near the main warehouse and turned off the engine, her expression more serious than Ava had ever seen it. Lieutenant, there are some things that the Air Force doesn't like to throw away, even when they should. Flight recorders, avionics components, anything that might contain sensitive information gets stored here instead of being properly disposed of. They approached the warehouse entrance, where a bored-looking civilian security guard barely glanced at Holt's credentials before waving them through. Inside, the space was cavernous and dimly lit, filled with rows of metal shelving that stretched from floor to ceiling. Each shelf contained boxes, crates, and equipment, tagged with identification numbers and storage dates. The thing about bureaucracies, Holt continued as they walked deeper into the warehouse, is that they're very good at following procedures, but not always very good at following up on those procedures. Equipment gets stored here and sometimes just forgotten. Ava was beginning to understand that this wasn't a routine inspection. Sergeant, are you looking for something specific? Section J7, Shelf 23B. Equipment recovered from aircraft incident the 15th of April 2023. Holt consulted a piece of paper that she'd pulled from her pocket. Your husband's crash site. The revelation hit Ava like a physical blow. They were looking for wreckage from Lucas's aircraft. Wreckage that should have been thoroughly examined and then properly disposed of according to standard protocols. If it was still here, that meant either the investigation had been incomplete or someone had wanted to keep certain evidence from being destroyed. They found Section J7 near the back of the warehouse, in an area that seemed to receive even less attention than the rest of the facility. Shelf 23B contained 3 boxes and a larger crate, all bearing tags that identified them as recovered from Lucas's F-35 Lightning II. This shouldn't be here, Ava whispered, staring at the boxes. Crash investigation evidence is supposed to be held at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, not in a storage depot in Okinawa. Holt was already opening the largest crate with a pry bar she'd brought from the truck. Unless someone wanted to make sure that certain pieces of evidence never made it to Wright-Patterson. Inside the crate, wrapped in protective foam, was Lucas's aircraft flight recorder, the black box that should have contained definitive information about what had happened during his final minutes. But as Holt carefully lifted it out of the crate, Ava could see that the device had been damaged in ways that didn't look consistent with a crash. Sergeant, look at this. Ava pointed to a section of the recorder where the metal housing showed what appeared to be burn marks in a very specific pattern. That doesn't look like impact damage. Holt examined the marks more closely, her expression growing increasingly grim. No, it doesn't. This looks like someone tried to destroy the internal components with some kind of directed energy weapon. Probably a high-powered laser designed to wipe the memory circuits without making it obvious that the data had been deliberately destroyed. Someone sabotaged the black box? More than that, someone sabotaged it in a way that would make it look like the damage occurred during the crash. If I hadn't spent 15 years working on flight recorders, I might not have recognized what this really is. As they photographed the evidence with Holt's camera, Ava felt a mixture of vindication and rage building in her chest. Here was proof that Lucas's death hadn't been an accident. It had been murder, followed by a sophisticated cover-up that included the deliberate destruction of evidence. We need to get this out of here, Holt said, carefully rewrapping the flight recorder. But we also need to be very careful about how we do it. If the wrong people find out we've been here... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. They both understood that they had just crossed a line from which there might be no return. As they loaded the flight recorder into their truck, the sound of approaching vehicles made them both freeze. Through the warehouse windows, Ava could see 2 black SUVs pulling up to the security checkpoint, their occupants dressed in civilian clothes but moving with the purposeful precision of military personnel. We need to leave, now. Holt slammed the truck's tailgate closed and gestured for Ava to get in the passenger seat. But we can't look like we're running. They drove out of the depot at normal speed, passing the black SUVs as they headed toward the security checkpoint. Ava forced herself not to look directly at the vehicles, but she caught a glimpse of men in dark suits speaking urgently into radio handsets. Do you think they know what we took? I think we're about to find out, Holt replied, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. But Lieutenant, whatever happens next, you need to know that what we just found changes everything. Your husband didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by people who had the resources and authority to cover it up at the highest levels. The call came at 0200 hours, waking Ava from a restless sleep filled with dreams of burning aircraft and faceless men in black suits. Colonel Mercer's voice was calm but urgent when she answered her phone. Lieutenant Torres, I need you to come to my office immediately. Use the back entrance to the Squadron building, and make sure you're not followed. Ava dressed quickly, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. The events at the depot had been 12 hours ago, and she'd spent those hours waiting for security forces to arrive at her door. Now, being summoned to Mercer's office in the middle of the night, she wondered if her investigation had finally caught up with her. The squadron building was eerily quiet at this hour, with only the emergency lighting providing illumination in the hallways. Mercer's office door was unlocked, and she found him sitting behind his desk with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be several classified documents spread out in front of him. "Close the door and lock it," he said without looking up. When she turned back to face him, she saw that his expression was a mixture of resignation and determination. "Lieutenant, Master Sergeant Holt briefed me on your activities today. She also showed me the photographs you took of your husband's flight recorder." Ava's heart sank. "Sir, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything. You need to listen." Mercer gestured for her to sit down, then slid a folder across the desk to her. "What you're about to read is a transcript of your husband's final radio transmissions. The real transcript, not the sanitized version that went into the official report." Ava opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were several pages of radio communications between Lucas and what appeared to be a mission control center, time-stamped and authenticated with official seals. As she read, her breath caught in her throat. The transcript showed Lucas reporting mechanical problems with his aircraft 17 minutes into what was clearly an operational mission, not a training flight. But more damning were his final transmissions, where he reported that his aircraft's systems were failing in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage. "Base, I'm showing multiple system failures that don't make sense. Hydraulics are gone, but the backup systems are failing in sequence, not simultaneously. This looks like someone's hacking my avionics." "Copy that, Ghost 7. Can you maintain altitude?" "Negative. I'm losing all flight controls." "Base, I think someone wanted this bird to go down. The failure pattern is too specific, too coordinated. Tell Ava that the ring coordinates are where they wanted me to die, but not where I actually." The transmission ended there. Ava looked up at Mercer, tears streaming down her face. He knew. In his final moments, Lucas knew that someone had murdered him. "Yes, he did. And he tried to leave you a message about it." Mercer pointed to the transcript. "The coordinates on your ring weren't the location where he died, Lieutenant. They were the location where his killers intended for him to die. The actual crash site was several miles away." "Sir, how long have you known about this?" Mercer was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I knew from the beginning. I was the mission commander who authorized that operation. Your husband and Lieutenant Commander Rios were part of a joint task force conducting a covert extraction in hostile territory. The mission was compartmentalized at the highest levels, with need-to-know restrictions that went all the way up to the Pentagon." "What were they extracting?" "A defecting enemy intelligence officer who had information about planned attacks on U.S. bases in the Pacific. The operation was successful. We got our asset out alive. But someone didn't want that intelligence officer to reach American interrogators. The implications were staggering. Someone on our side wanted the mission to fail? Someone with access to our most sensitive operational information and the technical capability to sabotage our aircraft remotely. Someone who was more concerned with protecting whatever secrets that defector might reveal than with the lives of our people." Mercer stood and moved to his window, looking out at the darkened flight line. "Lieutenant, I've spent 25 years in this uniform, and I've seen things that would shake your faith in everything you believe about honor and duty, but I've never seen anything as coldly calculated as what happened to your husband. Sir, why didn't you speak up 2 years ago? Why let them cover this up?" "Because I was told that revealing the truth would compromise ongoing operations and put other lives at risk. Because I was told that sometimes the greater good requires accepting terrible sacrifices." Mercer turned back to face her, his expression haunted. "Because I was a coward who chose to protect his own career instead of fighting for justice. And now? Now I've watched you risk everything to find the truth that I should have insisted on from the beginning. And I've realized that there's no greater good that justifies letting murderers hide behind national security classifications." Mercer returned to his desk and pulled out another document. "This is a formal request for an Inspector General investigation into the circumstances surrounding Captain Lucas Torres' death. It includes all the evidence you and Master Sergeant Holt have gathered, plus some additional classified materials that I'm declassifying under my emergency authority as Squadron Commander." "Sir, won't this destroy your career?" "Probably, but Lieutenant, some things are more important than careers. Your husband died believing in the values that this uniform represents. The least I can do is make sure his death means something." Quote, "The Inspector General team arrived from Washington 3 days later, led by a no-nonsense Air Force colonel named Patricia Williams, who had built her reputation on exposing high-level corruption and cover-ups. Williams established her temporary headquarters in a secure conference room at Kadena, and for the next week, the base buzzed with rumors about the investigation that was turning over every stone in the search for truth. Ava found herself at the center of a whirlwind of interviews, document reviews, and sworn statements. She testified about the falsified maintenance records, the suspicious behavior of senior officers, and the evidence she'd discovered at the storage depot. Master Sergeant Holt testified about the destroyed flight recorder and the systematic intimidation of maintenance personnel. Major Cho provided classified intelligence assessments that supported the theory of deliberate sabotage. But the most damaging testimony came from Technical Sergeant Price, who broke down during his interview and revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Under immunity from prosecution, he detailed how he'd been ordered by Lieutenant Commander Rios to falsify maintenance records, monitor Ava's activities, and report back on her investigation into her husband's death. The breakthrough came when Colonel Williams presented Rios with the evidence of his involvement in the cover-up. Faced with the prospect of court-martial and imprisonment, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the full scope of the conspiracy, reaching into the highest levels of joint command structure. The defecting intelligence officer that Lucas had died to extract had possessed information about a network of senior military officers who were selling classified information to foreign governments. When the defector was successfully brought to American custody, these officers had panicked and arranged for Lucas's aircraft to be sabotaged to prevent him from testifying about what he might have observed during the mission. "The irony," Colonel Williams told Ava during their final interview, "is that your husband probably never knew about the spy ring. He was just doing his job, following orders, serving his country." But the conspirators couldn't take the risk that he might have seen or heard something that could expose them. Quote, 2 weeks after the investigation began, the results were announced in a series of courts-martial and resignations that sent shockwaves through the Pacific Command structure. 3 general officers and 7 field-grade officers were charged with crimes ranging from treason to conspiracy to commit murder. Lieutenant Commander Rios was sentenced to 20 years in military prison for his role in the cover-up. On a clear Thursday morning, almost exactly 1 month after her aircraft had been grounded under false pretenses, Ava Torres walked across the tarmac toward her F-35 Lightning II. The jet had been thoroughly inspected by a new maintenance crew, led by Master Sergeant Holt, who had been promoted and given a commendation for her courage in exposing the conspiracy. "She's ready to fly, Lieutenant," Holt said, handing Ava the aircraft logbook. "No discrepancies, no problems, no politics. Just a clean machine waiting for a pilot who deserves to be in the cockpit." As Ava conducted her pre-flight inspection, she thought about Lucas and the price he'd paid for serving his country with honor. She thought about the coordinates engraved inside her wedding ring. Coordinates that had seemed like a romantic gesture, but had actually been his final gift to her, a clue that had ultimately brought his killers to justice. During her first flight in more than 3 weeks, climbing through the morning sky above Okinawa, Ava carried Lucas's ring in her flight glove, not as a memorial to the past, but as a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of rising to the surface when good people refuse to stop searching for it. Colonel Mercer's voice crackled through her headset as she reached cruising altitude. "Ghost 7, you're cleared for unrestricted flight operations. Welcome back to the sky, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir. It's good to be home." Below her, the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, vast and blue and full of possibilities. Somewhere in those waters, her husband had died fighting for something he believed in. But his death had not been in vain. It had exposed a cancer that had been eating away at the institution they both loved, and it had reminded everyone involved that integrity and honor were not just words in an oath, but principles worth risking everything to defend. The investigation was over, the guilty had been punished, and justice had finally been served. But as Ava flew her patrol route over the endless ocean, she understood that her real mission was just beginning. She had become something more than a fighter pilot. She had become a guardian of the truth, ready to fight against corruption and cover-ups wherever they might hide. The ring on her finger caught the sunlight streaming through her cockpit canopy, its simple silver surface reflecting the light like a beacon. Lucas was gone, But his legacy lived on in the pursuit of justice that had consumed the last month of her life. And in the clear, unlimited sky above the Pacific, First Lieutenant Ava Torres flew toward whatever challenges awaited her, carrying the memory of love and the promise of truth as her guides. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.